The morning sun peeked through the clouds as Eleanor Jenkins stepped off the bus in front of the towering Westbrook Conservatory. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a drum as she clutched her worn leather folder of sheet music. This was it, the day she had been preparing for during countless early mornings and late nights. The massive stone building looked like something from another world compared to the small church back home where she practiced. Columns stretched toward the sky, and giant windows reflected the morning light. Eleanor took a deep breath, adjusted her simple blue dress, the nicest one she owned, and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the lobby buzzed with activity. Young musicians carried instrument cases, talked in excited voices, and paced nervously. Eleanor felt out of place immediately. These people belonged here. They looked the part with their fancy clothes and confident smiles. She glanced down at her worn shoes, polished as best she could but still showing years of use. Auditions for piano are in the East Wing. Room 103, said a woman at the front desk without looking up from her computer. Her voice had the bored tone of someone who had repeated the same sentence 100 times that day. Thank you, Eleanor replied softly, her country accent hanging in the air a moment too long. A few nearby students turned to look at her. One girl with perfectly styled hair whispered something to her friend, and they both covered their mouths to hide their laughter. Eleanor pretended not to notice as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and followed the signs toward room 103. The hallways of Westbrook seemed endless, lined with photographs of famous musicians who had studied there. Their faces looked serious and important, nothing like the friendly faces back home who had encouraged her to apply. "You've got a gift, Eleanor," her old pastor had told her. "Don't waste it in our little town." She wondered now if he had been wrong. When she finally found room 103, Eleanor froze in the doorway. The waiting area was filled with people who looked like they belonged on concert posters. Young men in crisp suits and women in elegant dresses sat in small groups, some practicing finger movements on their knees, others quietly reviewing sheet music. And then there was the piano, a magnificent grand piano that gleamed under the lights at the center of the adjacent audition room. It was bigger and more beautiful than any instrument Eleanor had ever played. The sight of it made her mouth go dry. "Are you just going to stand there blocking the door?" Eleanor jumped slightly and turned to face a tall young man carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than everything she owned. His expression made it clear that he considered her an inconvenience. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, stepping aside. As he brushed past, she caught a whiff of expensive cologne. She found an empty chair in the corner of the waiting area and sat down, placing her folder carefully on her lap. The folder contained just 3 pieces of music, all she had been able to save up for over the years. The rest she had memorized by listening to recordings at the library or watching videos on the ancient computer at the community center. Across the room, a group of students were talking loudly enough for their voices to carry. "Did you see what she's wearing?" one girl said, not bothering to lower her voice. "She had shiny red hair and jewelry that caught the light when she moved her hands. It looks like something my grandmother would donate to charity." "Maybe she's in the wrong building," another student suggested. "The community college auditions are across town." Eleanor stared at her folder, pretending not to hear. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she forced herself to remain still. This wasn't the first time people had judged her by her appearance, and it probably wouldn't be the last. A woman with a clipboard walked into the room. "We'll begin auditions in 5 minutes. Please make sure your forms are complete and your music is ready for the accompanist." Eleanor's stomach tightened. No one had told her she needed an accompanist. She had practiced alone her entire life. As if reading her thoughts, a boy sitting nearby leaned over. "You can play solo if your piece doesn't require accompaniment," he said kindly. He was the first person to speak to her without judgment in his voice. "Thank you," Eleanor replied with a grateful smile. The boy looked like he might say something else, but a sharp voice cut through the room. "Attention, everyone. The judges have arrived." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Students sat up straighter, nervously adjusting their clothing and hair. A door opened and 3 people walked in. 2 men and 1 woman, all dressed in formal attire with serious expressions. The woman with the clipboard introduced them. "Our panel today includes Professor Richard Bennett, head of the piano department, Dr. Louise Hayes, Dean of Performance Studies, and Mr. Thomas Chen, visiting instructor from the National Symphony." The judges nodded politely as they took their seats at a long table facing the grand piano. They arranged papers in front of them and spoke quietly among themselves. Eleanor watched them with growing anxiety. These people would decide her future in a matter of minutes. They had probably heard thousands of talented pianists over the years. What made her think she could impress them? The woman with the clipboard called the first name. Olivia Winters. A confident young woman in a black dress stood up, handed her music to the accompanist, and took her place at the piano. Her posture was perfect, her movements practiced and precise. When she began to play, the notes filled the room like water filling a glass, smooth and controlled. Eleanor listened with her eyes closed. The girl was good, technically flawless, but something was missing. There was no heart in the music, no story being told. It was like looking at a beautiful painting protected behind glass. You could admire it, but you couldn't feel it. When Olivia finished, the judges made notes but gave no indication of their thoughts. The next student was called, then the next. Each played with impressive skill, and each received the same poker-faced response from the judges. As the morning wore on, Eleanor's name still hadn't been called. She watched student after student perform, each one dressed better than the last, each one carrying expensive leather portfolios with professionally printed sheet music. During a short break, Eleanor slipped out to find a bathroom. When she returned, she overheard two students talking just outside the door. "Have you seen the farm girl in the blue dress?" one asked. "How could I miss her? She looks like she milked the cows before catching the bus here. I heard she's self-taught."
Can you imagine?
Walking into Westbrook without proper training? This should be entertaining, at least. A little comic relief between real musicians. Eleanor stood frozen, her hand on the door handle. Part of her wanted to turn around, walk out of the building, and catch the next bus home. What was she thinking coming here? These people had been training their whole lives at expensive music schools with private tutors. She had learned on a second-hand upright, piano with sticky keys, and taught herself by listening and experimenting. But then she remembered the feeling she got when she played, like she was speaking a language that made perfect sense, even when the rest of the world didn't. Music had been her companion when she felt alone, her comfort when she was sad, her joy when there was nothing else to celebrate. She pushed open the door and walked back to her seat with her head held high. The clipboard woman returned. "Eleanor Jenkins." A few snickers rippled through the room. Eleanor stood up, her legs feeling like they might give way beneath her. As she walked toward the piano, she heard whispers. This should be quick. Did she make that dress herself? Where did she even come from? The judges looked up as she approached. Their expressions shifted from professional neutrality to something else. Doubt, perhaps, or pity. The woman judge frowned slightly at Eleanor's worn shoes and simple dress. The older man glanced at his watch as if already calculating how much time they would waste listening to her. "Good morning," said the younger male judge, his tone carefully polite. "What will you be playing for us today?" Eleanor placed her folder on the piano and took a deep breath. "I'll be playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. First movement," she said, her country accent sounding even stronger in the quiet room. Someone laughed out loud. The head judge raised his eyebrows. "That's a very challenging piece," he said slowly. "Are you sure you wouldn't prefer something simpler?" Eleanor felt a flash of anger beneath her nervousness. These people had already decided who she was and what she could do before hearing a single note. "I'm sure," she said, more firmly this time. She sat down at the piano bench and adjusted it to the right height. The keys before her were pristine ivory and ebony, unlike the yellowed keys of the church piano back home. She placed her hands in her lap for a moment, closing her eyes. In her mind, she was back in the empty church at dawn, the only time she could practice without bothering anyone. She remembered the feeling of the cool morning air, the way the first rays of sunlight would gradually illuminate the stained glass windows, the complete freedom to pour her heart into the music without anyone watching or judging. Eleanor opened her eyes, placed her hands on the keys, and prepared to play. Rose lost herself in the music as her fingers danced across the keys. The magnificent piano responded to her touch in ways her old upright back home never could. Each note rang clear and true, filling the audition hall with Rachmaninoff's passionate composition. As she reached the end of the first movement, she allowed herself another quick glance at the judges. Professor Baker had set down his pen entirely and was leaning forward, his eyebrows raised in astonishment. Dr. Wright's earlier look of dismissal had transformed into wide-eyed wonder. Mr. Chen, the guest judge from the National Symphony, had the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Rose returned her focus to the piano, drawing a deep breath as she prepared for the most technically challenging passage. This was the part she'd practiced countless times on the community center piano, often staying until the janitor kindly asked her to leave so he could lock up. Her fingers flew across the keys with precision and confidence, each note exactly where it needed to be. When the final chords of the movement resonated through the room, Rose held her breath. For a moment there was complete silence. She kept her hands hovering over the keys, unsure of what to do next. "That will be all, Ms. Wilson," Professor Baker finally said, his voice noticeably warmer than before. "Thank you." Rose stood and gave a small bow, just as she'd seen musicians do in videos. As she turned to leave, she caught Mr. Chen whispering something to Dr. Wright, who nodded with a surprised expression. David, the stage manager, was waiting by the door with an encouraging smile. "Well done," he whispered as he led her back to the waiting area. When Rose entered the room, every head turned. The chatter that had filled the space moments before died instantly. She could feel the weight of their stares as she walked to her seat, keeping her eyes forward and her back straight. No way she just played Rachmaninoff. Someone whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "Probably butchered it," another replied, though with less conviction than before. Rose sat quietly in her corner chair, hands folded in her lap. Inside, her heart was racing with a mixture of pride and uncertainty. She knew she had played well, better than she ever had during practice, but was it enough? These people had been training at elite institutions their whole lives. She'd been figuring it out alone in an empty community center. The blonde girl who had mocked her earlier kept shooting curious glances in her direction. After a few minutes, she stood up and approached Rose, her expensive heels clicking on the floor. "I'm Vanessa," she said, extending a manicured hand. "Your playing was unexpected." Rose hesitated before shaking the offered hand. "Thank you, I think." Vanessa sat down in the empty chair beside Rose. "Where did you study?" she asked, her tone suggesting she couldn't imagine any answer that would make sense. "I didn't," Rose replied honestly. "Not formally, anyway. My neighbor gave me some lessons when I was little, but mostly I taught myself." Vanessa's perfectly shaped eyebrows shot up. "You're joking." "No, I'm not, but that's impossible. Nobody teaches themselves Rachmaninoff." Rose shrugged slightly. "I listened to recordings, watched videos at the library, practiced whenever I could." Vanessa opened her mouth to say something else, but Patricia called another name, and a nervous-looking boy stood up for his turn. The interruption seemed to break the moment, and Vanessa returned to her friends, all of whom immediately huddled together, whispering and glancing at Rose. The morning dragged on. More contestants came and went. Rose tried to stay calm, but her thoughts kept racing. What would happen if she actually got accepted? Her family could never afford the tuition. Were there scholarships? Would she have to move to the city? Where would she live? Just before the lunch break, Patricia appeared in the doorway with a serious expression. "Rose Wilson?" Rose looked up, startled. Had she done something wrong? "The judges would like to speak with you privately," Patricia said. A collective murmur swept through the room. This was clearly not standard procedure. Rose stood on shaky legs and followed Patricia down a different hallway, away from the audition room. They stopped at a door marked Faculty Lounge. Patricia knocked once and opened it. Inside, the three judges sat at a small round table. A fourth person, an older woman with silver hair and an elegant blue suit, stood by the window. "Ms. Wilson," Professor Baker said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Please have a seat." Rose sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. "This is Dean Carter," Professor Baker continued, nodding toward the silver-haired woman. "She's the head of our music department." Dean Carter studied Rose with intelligent eyes. "Ms. Wilson, your performance this morning was quite remarkable." "Thank you," Rose said softly. "Professor Baker tells me you have no formal training," Dean Carter continued. "Is that correct?" Rose nodded. "I had a few basic lessons as a child, but my family couldn't afford to continue them. I've mostly learned on my own." The four educators exchanged glances. Mr. Chen leaned forward. How did you learn the Rachmaninoff? He asked, his voice accented but clear. Rose explained about the community center piano, the recordings she listened to over and over, the videos she watched at the public library, the music theory books she checked out. She told them about working at the diner to save money for sheet music, about practicing at dawn before anyone else needed the piano. As she spoke, she saw their expressions shift from skepticism to something that looked like respect. Ms. Wilson, Dean Carter said when Rose finished, talent like yours is rare, even among students with every advantage and opportunity. Your dedication is even more impressive. Rose felt a flutter of hope in her chest. However, Dean Carter continued, there are significant gaps in your musical education that would need to be addressed. The flutter dimmed. Rose nodded, looking down at her worn shoes. Of course it wasn't enough. She had been foolish to think. We'd like to offer you a provisional place in our special talents program, Dean Carter said. Rose's head snapped up. What? Professor Baker smiled for the first time. It's a program designed for exceptional musicians who have taken unconventional paths. You would have some catching up to do in music theory and history, but we would provide the resources and mentorship to help you succeed. And a full scholarship, added Dr. Wright, who now looked embarrassed about her earlier dismissiveness. The program includes tuition, housing, and a small stipend for living expenses. Rose couldn't believe what she was hearing. But why me? There are so many talented musicians here today. Mr. Chen spoke up. Technical skill can be taught, Ms. Wilson. Passion cannot. Your playing has both technical precision and something much rarer, genuine emotional depth. You made that piano sing in a way many conservatory-trained musicians never achieve. Rose felt tears welling in her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Dean Carter suggested with a gentle smile. Yes, Rose whispered. Absolutely yes. Excellent, Dean Carter said, standing up. Patricia will help you with the paperwork. You'll start next semester. The meeting concluded with handshakes all around. Rose's head was spinning as Patricia led her back to the waiting area to collect her things. The other contestants looked up curiously when she entered. What happened? Vanessa asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Rose couldn't keep the smile from her face. They offered me a scholarship, she said quietly. Vanessa's mouth fell open. Several others looked stunned. As Rose gathered her worn folder, she noticed a familiar face at the door. The kind stage manager, David. Congratulations, he said with a warm smile. I knew you were special the moment you started playing. Not many people can silence these judges. Thank you, Rose replied. I still can't believe it. Believe it, he said. Oh, and you might want to prepare yourself. For what? David grinned. Word travels fast around here. There's already a crowd gathered in the lobby who heard about your audition and want to meet you. Rose blinked in surprise. A crowd? To meet me. Like I said, word travels fast when something extraordinary happens, David explained. One of the music theory professors was passing by during your audition and texted several colleagues. They told their students. And, well, as if to prove his point, the blonde girl Vanessa was already on her phone, apparently telling someone about Rose. You're going to be quite the celebrity around campus, David continued. The self-taught pianist who stunned the Westbrook judges. Rose felt a mixture of embarrassment and pride. Just hours ago, these same people had been mocking her clothes and background. Now they wanted to meet her? Come on, David said, gesturing toward the door. I'll help you navigate the crowd. As they walked through the hallway, Rose thought about how drastically her life had just changed. By this time tomorrow, she would be back at the diner, serving coffee and telling her regular customers about her incredible day. In a few months, she would return to this grand building, not as an outsider, but as a student with as much right to be here as anyone else. Just before they reached the lobby, Rose paused and took a deep breath. Through the glass doors, she could see a small gathering of students and faculty, all looking expectantly toward the hallway where she stood. Ready? David asked. Rose squared her shoulders and nodded. Ready? As they pushed through the doors, the crowd fell silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. Rose Wilson, the simple girl in the blue dress who had been mocked just hours before, stepped forward to meet her new future, her head held high. 3 months later, Rose stood outside the imposing doors of Westbrook Conservatory once again. This time, instead of a worn blue dress, she wore simple but new clothes, Jeans, a sweater, and a proper winter coat that Dean Carter had insisted was necessary for city winters. Her old music folder had been replaced by a leather case gifted to her by the staff at the diner where she'd worked. Inside was a handmade card signed by all her regular customers wishing her luck. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, just as she had on audition day. But this time she actually believed it. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind. After her audition, Rose had returned home to give notice at the diner, pack her few belongings, and say goodbye to the community that had supported her all these years. Mrs. Henderson, her elderly neighbor who had given her those first piano lessons, had cried happy tears and pressed a small wooden metronome into her hands, a family heirloom she'd treasured for decades. The local newspaper had even run a story about her. Small-town pianist wins full scholarship to prestigious conservatory. People she barely knew stopped her on the street to offer congratulations. The community center had hosted a farewell concert, where Rose played for a packed room of townspeople who gave her a standing ovation. Now, as students rushed past her into the warmth of the building, Rose took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy doors. The same grand lobby greeted her, but this time she belonged here. At the reception desk, a different woman looked up with a smile.
"Can I help you?"
"I'm Rose Wilson. Today's my first day in the Special Talents program." Recognition flashed across the woman's face. "Of course. Dean Carter mentioned you'd be arriving today. Let me call Patricia to come get you." While she waited, Rose watched the stream of students coming and going. They all seemed so confident, so at ease in these grand surroundings. Would she ever feel that way? "Rose!" She turned to see Patricia walking toward her, clipboard in hand as always, but with a warm smile that hadn't been there during auditions. "Welcome to Westbrook," Patricia said, giving Rose's hand a firm shake. "We're delighted to have you join us. How was your journey?" "Good, thank you. The bus was on time." "Excellent. Now, let me show you to your dormitory first so you can drop off your things. Then we'll get your student ID and class schedule." Rose followed Patricia across the campus, trying not to gawk at the beautiful buildings and manicured grounds. Students sat on benches despite the cold weather, some with instruments, others with books. A group was singing harmonies near a fountain, their breath visible in the crisp air. "Here we are, Carlisle Hall," Patricia announced, stopping in front of a brick building with ivy climbing its walls. "This is where our music students live. You have a single room, which is unusual for first years, but Dean Carter thought it would give you more opportunity to practice and adjust." Inside, the dormitory was warm and lively. Students called to each other from doorways or lounged in common areas with cups of coffee. A few looked up curiously as Patricia led Rose up the stairs. "Room 214, Patricia said, unlocking a door and handing Rose the key. "It's small, but it has everything you need." The room was indeed small, but to Rose it was perfect. A narrow bed with fresh linens, a desk with a lamp, a dresser, and a small upright piano against one wall. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys. "It's not a grand like in the performance halls," Patricia explained, "but it's well maintained and should serve for practice." "It's wonderful," Rose said sincerely. This piano, modest as it was by Westbrook standards, was far better than anything she'd had regular access to before. After settling her belongings, Rose followed Patricia to the administration building to complete her registration. As they walked across campus, Rose noticed several students pointing and whispering. One even took a photo with her phone. "Am I imagining things, or are people staring at me?" Rose asked quietly. Patricia chuckled. "You're something of a campus celebrity, I'm afraid. The story of your audition has become quite legendary. Students rarely get standing ovations from our judges." Rose felt her cheeks warm. "They gave me a standing ovation?" "After you left, yes, Mr. Chen was particularly impressed. He told the other faculty you had the most natural musicality he'd seen in a decade." Before Rose could respond, a tall figure approached them, Professor Baker, the head judge from her audition. "Ah, Ms. Wilson, welcome to Westbrook." He extended his hand with a smile that transformed his serious face. "I hope you're ready for an intense semester." "I am, sir. Thank you for this opportunity. You earned it. Now I should warn you, your first few weeks will be challenging. We've designed a special curriculum to help you catch up on theory and history while continuing to develop your performance skills." Rose nodded, determination replacing her nervousness. "I'm ready to work hard. I have no doubt. In fact, I've scheduled your first lesson with me for tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp in Studio C. Rose's eyes widened. The head of the piano department was going to teach her personally? Thank you, Professor. I'll be there. After Professor Baker departed, Patricia finished helping Rose with her registration. By late afternoon, Rose had a student ID, a class schedule, and a campus map. Your first class isn't until tomorrow, so you have the evening to settle in, Patricia explained. The dining hall serves dinner until 8. Just show your ID card. Left alone for the first time since arriving, Rose decided to explore the campus. She wandered through buildings filled with practice rooms, each containing a piano. She passed rehearsal spaces where string quartets and wind ensembles were practicing. Everywhere there was music, from classical sonatas to jazz improvisations. In one hallway, Rose paused to listen to someone playing a hauntingly beautiful piece she didn't recognize. The melody was so captivating that she stood there, eyes closed until the music stopped. Enjoying Debussy? Rose opened her eyes to see a friendly-looking girl with curly hair and glasses standing in the doorway of the practice room. Is that who it was? It was beautiful, Rose admitted. The girl smiled. I'm Lily, piano performance, second year. Rose, piano, special talents program. Lily's eyes widened with recognition. You're the self-taught pianist who played Rachmaninoff. Everyone's been talking about you. Rose shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Lily laughed. Welcome to Westbrook. News travels fast here, especially musical news. She checked her watch. Hey, a bunch of us are heading to dinner soon. Want to join? The invitation surprised Rose. Really? You don't mind? Of course not. Plus, everyone's dying to meet you. It's not every day a complete unknown walks in and impresses Chen. He's notoriously difficult to please. Rose hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'd like that. Thank you. Dinner in the grand dining hall was overwhelming but exciting. Lily introduced Rose to a table full of music students who welcomed her warmly, asking about her background and how she'd learned to play without formal training. To Rose's relief, there was genuine curiosity in their questions, not the mockery she'd faced during auditions. So you really learned Rachmaninoff just by listening and watching videos? Asked a boy named Tom who played clarinet. Rose nodded. And reading about technique. The library had some good books. That's insane, said another student, shaking her head in admiration. I've been studying piano since I was 4 and I still struggle with Rachmaninoff. Different paths, same destination, said a quiet boy at the end of the table. He had been introduced as Huang, a violin prodigy from China. Music finds a way. After dinner, Lily offered to show Rose the main performance hall, a space reserved for recitals and important concerts. Most first years don't perform here until the spring showcase, Lily explained as they entered the darkened hall. But I have a feeling you might get invited. Sooner. The space was magnificent, rows of plush seats facing a stage where a concert grand piano stood in solitary splendor under a single spotlight left on for security. Go on, Lily urged, seeing Rose's longing look. No one's around. You can play a little. Is that allowed? Lily grinned. Not exactly. But we all do it sometimes. Just keep it brief. Heart-pounding, Rose approached the magnificent instrument. This was no practice piano or even the nice grand from her audition. This was a concert Steinway, the kind used by the greatest pianists in the world. She sat down, adjusting the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. The action was so responsive it seemed to anticipate her touch. Rose began playing softly, not Rachmaninoff this time, but a simple melody her mother used to hum when Rose was small. The sound that filled the hall was pure and perfect. Rose closed her eyes, letting her fingers find their way through the familiar tune, adding harmonies and variations as she went. For those few minutes, she forgot about being the strange new scholarship student, about her upcoming classes and the work ahead. There was only the music, as there had always been. When she finished, soft applause startled her. Rose turned to see not just Lily, but a small group of students and one faculty member who had slipped in unnoticed. Beautiful, said the professor, stepping forward. Simple, but played with such feeling. I'm sorry, Rose stammered. I didn't know. No apologies needed for music like that, the professor said kindly. I'm Dr. Lee, Composition Department. You must be Rose Wilson. Welcome to Westbrook. As they walked back to the dormitory later, Lily nudged Rose's shoulder. See? I told you that you're a celebrity. Rose laughed, feeling truly relaxed for the first time that day. I don't want to be a celebrity. I just want to learn and play music. Well, at Westbrook, if you play like that, the two go hand in hand, Lily replied. Get used to it. Back in her room, Rose sat on the edge of her bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Tomorrow, classes would begin. The real work would start. There would be challenges and probably setbacks. But tonight, as she looked at the small piano in her room, her very own piano, Rose felt something she hadn't expected. Belonging. She was still the same small-town girl in a world of privilege and tradition. But here what mattered most was the music. And music had always been her true home. 2 months into her first semester at Westbrook, Rose sat in the library surrounded by music theory textbooks, her forehead creased in concentration. What came naturally to her fingers didn't always translate easily to paper. While she could play complex pieces by ear and feel, explaining the mathematical structure behind them was proving to be her greatest challenge. The difference between a diminished seventh and a half diminished seventh is killing me, she muttered to herself. Struggling with Hartman's theory assignment? Asked a familiar voice. Rose looked up to see Lily sliding into the chair across from her, a sympathetic smile on her face. Is it that obvious? Rose sighed. Only because I've been there, Lily replied. Everyone hits a wall with theory at some point. Even the students who've been studying since they were 5. Rose closed her textbook with a groan. I can hear the difference perfectly when I play them. I just can't seem to get the terminology right. That's because you learned backward from most of us, Lily explained. We learned the rules first, then how to play. You learned to play first, and now you're learning what all those intuitive choices you made are actually called. It made sense when Lily put it that way. Rose had been playing music long before she knew what a dominant 7th chord was called. Her ear and fingers knew the way, even if her brain couldn't yet put the proper labels on everything. How was your lesson with Professor Baker this morning? Lily asked, changing the subject. Rose couldn't help but smile. Amazing. Challenging, but amazing. Her twice-weekly lessons with the head of the piano department had become the highlight of her schedule. Professor Baker was demanding but fair, pushing Rose to refine her natural talent with proper technique. He says I'm making good progress, Rose added, but there's still so much to learn. That's Westbrook for you, Lily laughed. The moment you master one thing, they throw something harder at you. A student Rose didn't recognize approached their table hesitantly. Excuse me, are you Rose Wilson? Rose nodded, still not fully used to being recognized by strangers. I'm Peter from the events committee. Dean Carter asked me to give you this. He handed her an envelope with the Westbrook seal. After Peter left, Rose opened the envelope while Lily watched curiously. What is it? Lily asked as Rose's eyes widened. An invitation to perform at the winter showcase, Rose whispered in disbelief. That's for advanced students, isn't it? Lily grabbed the letter. Are you kidding me? First years never get invited to perform at the winter showcase. This is huge, Rose. The Winter Showcase was Westbrook's most prestigious internal event. A chance for the conservatory's best students to perform for the entire school, plus important guests from the music world. Alumni who now played with major orchestras often returned, and talent scouts from across the country attended. There must be some mistake, Rose said. I've only been here 2 months. No mistake, came a deep voice behind them. They turned to see Mr. Chen, the guest judge from Rose's audition who had apparently extended his visit to teach master classes for the semester. Ms. Wilson, he continued, talent like yours should not be hidden away. The committee specifically requested you after hearing about your progress from Professor Baker. But what would I even play? Rose asked, her mind racing. The Rachmaninoff that got you here would be the obvious choice, Mr. Chen suggested. But perhaps you'd like to challenge yourself with something new? You have 3 weeks to prepare. After Mr. Chen left, Rose stared at the invitation in disbelief. I can't do this, Lily. Everyone will be watching. What if I mess up? Then you mess up, Lily said practically. But you won't. This is what you were born to do, Rose. You just got here a little differently than the rest of us. That evening, Rose called Mrs. Henderson back home to share the news. Her former neighbor's delight and pride were evident even through the phone. I always knew you were special, dear, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice shaky with age but warm with affection. When you play at Carnegie Hall someday, you'll get me a front row seat, won't you? Rose laughed. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I still have to get through this showcase without embarrassing myself. You'll do nothing of the sort, Mrs. Henderson assured her. Just play from your heart as you always have. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Rose practiced more intensely than ever before, often staying in the practice rooms until they closed at midnight. After much deliberation and guidance from Professor Baker, she chose to play Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, a piece that showcased both technical skill and emotional depth. The night before the showcase, Rose couldn't sleep. She paced her small dormitory room, running the piece through her mind over and over. What if she forgot a passage? What if her hands shook? What if everyone realized she didn't belong here after all? A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Rose opened the door to find Lily holding 2 cups of tea. Thought you might need this, Lily said, handing her a steaming cup. Pre-performance jitters? Rose nodded, grateful for the company. How did you know? Because everyone gets them. Even at your level, Lily replied, sitting cross-legged on Rose's bed. The day I don't get nervous before a performance is the day I should quit music. They talked late into the night about music, about Rose's hometown, about Lily's family of doctors who couldn't understand why she'd chosen piano instead of medical school. By the time Lily left, Rose felt calmer, her fears put into perspective. The winter showcase was held in Westbrook's Grand Concert Hall, the same one where Rose had played that simple melody her first night on campus. Now backstage, she peeked through the curtains at the packed auditorium. Faculty members sat in the front rows, followed by students and then visitors, including several people with press badges. Nervous? Asked a voice behind her. Rose turned to see Vanessa, the blonde girl who had mocked her clothing on audition day. They had crossed paths occasionally during the semester, exchanging polite but distant greetings. Terrified, Rose admitted. To her surprise, Vanessa smiled genuinely. You shouldn't be. I've heard you practicing. You're going to be amazing. Before Rose could respond, Vanessa added, Listen, I never properly apologized for how I treated you at the auditions. I was being awful. It's okay, Rose said, meaning it. That feels like a lifetime ago. Still, Vanessa insisted, I was wrong about you. A lot of us were. Their conversation was cut short as Dean Carter appeared to organize the performers. Rose was scheduled to play fourth after a violinist, a cellist, and a soprano. From her place in the wings, Rose watched the first 3 performances, all flawless, all met with enthusiastic applause. Then it was her turn. Next, we are pleased to present a new talent at Westbrook, Dean Carter announced. Performing Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, please welcome Rose Wilson. The applause seemed to come from far away as Rose walked onto the stage. The spotlight felt hot on her skin as she approached the gleaming concert grand. She adjusted the bench, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. For a terrifying moment, her mind went blank. The notes she had practiced thousands of times vanished from her memory. She closed her eyes, feeling panic rise in her chest. Then she remembered Mrs. Henderson's words. Play from your heart, Rose began, letting her fingers find their way. The opening notes of the ballade filled the hall, gentle, questioning like the beginning of a story. As the piece progressed, growing more complex and passionate, Rose lost herself in the music just as she had done in the community center back home. She forgot about the audience, the judges, the pressure. There was only Chopin's beautiful, turbulent composition and her connection to it. Her hands moved across the keyboard with both power and delicacy, bringing out every nuance of emotion in the piece. When the final chords reverberated through the hall, there was a moment of complete silence. Rose opened her eyes, suddenly aware again of where she was and what she had just done. Then the audience erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, their faces showing genuine emotion. In the front row, Professor Baker was smiling broadly. Mr. Chen nodded in approval. Dean Carter wiped a tear from her eye. Rose stood and bowed, her heart pounding with relief and joy. As she left the stage, other performers waited to congratulate her, including Vanessa, who gave her a spontaneous hug. That was incredible, Vanessa whispered. You made me cry, and I never cry at performances. The rest of the showcase passed in a happy daze for Rose. After the final performer, all the musicians returned to the stage for a group bow. Standing among these talented students, no longer an outsider but one of them, Rose felt a surge of belonging. At the reception afterward, Rose found herself surrounded by well-wishers, including several professionals who handed her their cards. "Miss Wilson," said a distinguished-looking man in a perfectly tailored suit. "I'm Robert Thompson from the National Symphony. We're always looking for fresh talent for our Young Artist program. And I'm Alice Wong from Juilliard," added a woman beside him. "We should talk about your future plans." Rose was speechless. Before she could formulate a response, Professor Baker appeared at her side. "My student has had quite an evening," he said smoothly. "Perhaps we could schedule proper meetings later this week?" As the crowd around her finally thinned, Rose found a quiet moment with Lily. "Can you believe this?" Rose asked, still dazed by the attention. 3 months ago, I was serving coffee at a diner. Now people from Juilliard want to talk to me." Lily squeezed her arm. "I can absolutely believe it. Your playing tonight wasn't just good technique. Rose, you have something special, something that can't be taught." Later that night, back in her dormitory room, Rose sat at her window looking out at the campus lights. She thought about the long journey that had brought her here, the years of pre-dawn practice sessions, the discouragement, the moments of doubt. She thought about the people who had mocked her simple clothes and country accent on audition day, many of whom had congratulated her sincerely tonight. She thought about Mrs. Henderson and the diner staff back home, who had believed in her before anyone else. Most of all, she thought about music, the universal language that had given a simple small-town girl a voice that could move people to tears. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be more theory tests to struggle through, more techniques to master, more pieces to learn. The path ahead was long and demanding. But tonight, Rose Wilson, once mocked for her simplicity, had proven that true talent comes in many forms, from many backgrounds. And she was just getting started. 2 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. Rose sat in a coffee shop across from Westbrook Conservatory, watching students hurry to classes with instrument cases slung over their shoulders. It was hard to believe that she had once been an outsider in that world, the small-town girl in a worn blue dress who everyone had mocked. "Penny for your thoughts," said Lily, sliding into the chair opposite with 2 steaming cups. After 2 years as roommates, Lily could read Rose's expressions like sheet music. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Rose replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Finals week had left them both exhausted. "Speaking of change," Lily said with a grin, "have you told your family about the competition yet?" Rose shook her head. "I wanted to wait until after my lesson with Professor Baker today. Make sure he thinks I'm ready." The International Chopin competition was held every 5 years in Warsaw, Poland. It was one of the most prestigious piano competitions in the world, launching the careers of legendary pianists. When Professor Baker had suggested Rose apply, she'd thought he was joking. "He wouldn't have recommended you if he didn't think you were ready," Lily pointed out. "Everyone knows you're his star pupil." Rose blushed at the compliment. Despite 2 years of accolades and growing recognition in the music world, she still found it hard to accept praise. Part of her would always be the girl practicing on a worn-out piano in an empty community center. Later that afternoon, Rose sat in Professor Baker's studio for her weekly lesson. The room was familiar now. The grand piano in the center, shelves lined with scores and recordings, photographs of Professor Baker with famous musicians on the walls. "Your Chopin etude is coming along nicely," he said after she finished playing. "Your technique has improved tremendously." "Thank you, Professor." He studied her for a moment. "Have you made a decision about the competition?" Rose took a deep breath. "I think I want to try. If you really believe I'm ready." Professor Baker smiled, a rare sight that still surprised his students. "I wouldn't have suggested it otherwise. The competition is fierce and the preparation will be the hardest work you've ever done. But you have something special, Rose. Something that can't be taught. That's what Lily always says. Lily is right. Technical skill can be developed through practice, but your emotional connection to the music, that's a gift." He closed the score on the piano. "If you commit to this, we'll need to intensify your training schedule. Are you prepared for that?" Rose nodded without hesitation. "Yes." "Good. I've already spoken with Dean Carter about reducing your theory course load next semester so you can focus on preparation." He handed her a thick folder. "These are the competition requirements. 4 rounds all Chopin, You'll need to prepare nearly 2 hours of music. As Rose left the studio clutching the folder, her mind was already racing with possibilities. She had grown to love Chopin's music deeply during her time at Westbrook, finding in his compositions the perfect blend of technical challenge and emotional depth. The campus was quiet as she walked back to her dormitory. Most students already gone for winter break. Rose had planned to visit her hometown for the holidays, but now she wondered if she should stay and begin practicing instead. Back in her room, she called Mrs. Henderson with the news. "The Chopin competition," Mrs. Henderson exclaimed, her voice crackling over the phone. "Oh, Rose, that's wonderful. Your parents would have been so proud." Rose smiled sadly. Both her parents had passed away years ago. Her father before she was born, her mother when Rose was 14. It was after her mother's death that Rose had found solace in music, spending hours at the piano while living with her aunt. "I wish they could see me now," Rose said softly. "They can, dear," Mrs. Henderson assured her, in their own way. After hanging up, Rose opened the competition folder and spread the papers across her desk. The requirements were daunting. Preliminary round, quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals, each with specific Chopin works required. Only the world's top pianists even attempted this competition. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. The door opened to reveal Vanessa, who over the past 2 years had transformed from Rose's critic to one of her closest friends. "I just heard the news from Professor Baker," Vanessa said, her eyes wide with excitement. "The Chopin competition?" "Rose, that's incredible." "It's just an application," Rose said modestly. "There's no guarantee I'll be accepted." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Please, after your performance at the Dean's concert last month, they'd be fools not to accept you." Rose had indeed received standing ovations for her interpretation of Chopin's Fourth Ballade at the prestigious annual concert. The school newspaper had called her playing transcendent, and a visiting conductor had asked for her contact information. "Well, either way I have a ton of work ahead of me," Rose said, gesturing to the papers on her desk. "Which is why I'm here," Vanessa replied with a smile. "A bunch of us are organizing a practice schedule. We'll take turns bringing you food, keeping people away from your practice rooms, recording your sessions for review, whatever you need." Rose stared at her, touched beyond words. "You guys would do that for me?" "Of course we would. You're one of us, Rose. And when one of us has a shot at something like this, we all pitch in." Vanessa's expression turned serious. "You know what this could mean for your career, right? Winners get concert bookings worldwide, recording contracts." "I'm trying not to think that far ahead," Rose admitted. "The idea of playing in Warsaw in front of the world's top piano experts is terrifying enough." 6 months passed in a blur of intense practice. Rose worked harder than she ever had before, often playing until her fingers cramped and her back ached from sitting at the piano. Professor Baker pushed her relentlessly, picking apart every phrase, every dynamic marking, every emotional nuance in the Chopin pieces. True to their word, Rose's friends formed a support system around her. Lily made sure she ate properly and got at least some sleep. Vanessa organized a rotating schedule of students who brought coffee and snacks to her practice room. Even Mr. Chen, who had joined the permanent faculty, offered extra coaching sessions. When the letter arrived confirming her acceptance to the competition, Rose wasn't even surprised. Somehow, during those months of preparation, her self-doubt had transformed into quiet confidence. She knew the music intimately now, not just the notes on the page, but the feelings behind them, the stories they told. The night before her departure for Warsaw, the piano department held a small send-off concert. Rose played excerpts from her competition program for faculty. Students and special guests, including Mrs. Henderson, who had made the long journey to wish her former student luck. "I can't believe this is happening," Rose told Mrs. Henderson afterward, as they sat in a quiet corner of the reception. "Sometimes I still feel like that girl in the blue dress walking into Westbrook for the first time." Mrs. Henderson patted her hand. "That girl is still part of you, dear. She's the one who had the courage to follow her dream when everyone else doubted her." The next day, Rose found herself on a plane to Poland, Profe,